Good afternoon. I'd like to call the January 21st, 2020 School Board Work Session to order. First, we have the Superintendent's proposed FY21 Operating Budget, Dr. Daugherty and Dr. Taylor.
Good afternoon, and thank you for being here, and for the audience, thank you for being here. I'm going to try to maneuver us some way to talk to everybody, but Thomas and I will be a tag team, and we want to share with you some history, why we need the funding, and then what the funding looks like. So again, we're excited and looking forward to the next several months of sharing the needs that we have for our young men and women in our schools. So I thought it'd be appropriate, since yesterday is Martin Luther King Day, and a great quote, the function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. Intelligence plus character is the goal of true education. Truest statement ever, and we are excited. And I realize how close you are to this screen. The glass sort of magnifies on you greatly here. You know, when you think of this school district, it's a Fortune 500 company. When you think about having the largest human resources, one of the largest human resource operations, facility operations, transportation, catering. Sometimes it's hard to think about our size of our district. We were sharing today with people, and you know, if you're at a school, you know that's your life. Your school's your life, or if you're in a district. When you think of our county and the size of our county and the responsibility that we have, I think this budget makes a lot of sense. So when you think about $677 million in operating from this year that we're in right now, over or nearly 7,300 full-time, that doesn't count all the part-time people we have. You think of the square footage that we have in our schools with 70-plus buildings, the miles that we travel throughout the year, the amount of meals that we serve, and the devices that we have in the system that we have to take care of. When you think of other schools, and you think even around us, school system around us, when they would have a tenth of this to deal with. So we believe in the points that we have in the mission, that is to create a better tomorrow, to ignite passion, to look at the amazing opportunities for learning and environments. So if we believe in the mission, then we believe in the budget, and that the budget goes to make sure all of our kids have a great experience. We've all had children. You have children in the system, and every day we get judged on how great was your day. We don't get a report card at the end of the year. We get every day 63,000 students plus go home, and their parents ask them, how was your day? Tell us about your day. And so you want a positive experience for them. You know, we have 7 schools which are nationally blue ribbon schools, 7 that are distinguished, Title I distinguished schools, 7 that are middle schools to watch winners. And when you think about that, they're in the top 10% in the state. They're also in the top 10% in the nation, those 7 schools. And 17 Virginia Index of Performance winners. A lot to be proud of, and and there's a lot to do to strive to get better. So you have the accreditation, and you know, we have 61 schools that get accredited, and 100% of them are this year are accredited. You will see this doesn't continue without the resources we need, and I'll explain why. So let's look at our students. So students enrolling are increasing. I think if you make a turn anywhere in our district, in our county, you will see construction. I visited our construction sites yesterday, but you will see housing developments occurring. And they're growing, and they're not going to stop anywhere soon. People love moving to this county. They know the strong educational system. They see the value of living here. And that's said over and over again, that a great school system generates a positive community. We are facing some change. First time in the school division's history, we are a minority majority, and that we have a student need base that is growing, but also as complex. And we welcome the diversity, we welcome the issues, but we are public education, and all means all for us. And I'm very proud of our teachers and our administrators that every child is important to them. So you could see the growth of 942 this year. There's an asterisk there because this number does not include the over 1,100 pre-K students that we have. So there's not a discrepancy in our number. We, as of Friday, were at 62,800 students as of Friday. And that number does not include all of the pre-K because we don't get the funding formula for the pre-K. So since 2007, the changes, we've had 7,100 students, total growth of low income enrolled, 3,300 students with total growth of special education, 1,600 students of growth in English language enrollment, and we currently have 99 languages in our system. 99 languages. This is our enrollment breakdown for this year. You notice going all the way back to 99, 2000. So this year, a 20-year segment there. And you can see the change in our diversity, which is, one, is a positive. It's strengthening our community, making us a melting pot for all of our young men and women that are coming to us. So I want you to see this number of a family of four making less than $46,435 can qualify for free and reduced lunch. You see the numbers. A starting teacher in our system with children would qualify. And I'm going to say this over and over again. I keep hearing that it's maybe not be a good thing to have our educators, our employees at the top of the scale. I think that's a very wrong philosophy to have. We should be at the top of the scale because we have great people in our school district and they need to be rewarded. And our people that work in our school system need to know that we love that they're here, we value them, and I don't think it's a bad thing to say your pay scale's at the top of the area. And I've heard that over and over again, and a Mervism is you should be number one in all things. But you look at how we've changed over from 2015 to 2018 and the growth that's occurred in our schools. This is society. This is what society looks like. And we are society. Everything that happens in our communities, in our county, is in our schools. And so we must be able to address them with a strong presence of resources. We serve all students to the best we can. We serve all students. You know, we have federal law requires us to educate every child in our schools. There's no questions asked. We don't ask where you're from. You walk in our schools, you say you live here, welcome to Chesterfield. That's what we do. It's different than the business model, and sometimes people want to look at the business model to run schools, and that's not how this works. We are all doors open for the kids coming in. And we know that one size doesn't fit all. And so we want to address this in our budget, that every school in our district has different needs. And so we want to be able to address that and say, as a principal, as a staff, we want you to be able to address these needs with the adequate resources. So some warning signs. Nobody likes to hear these, but my responsibility, as though even without the legal responsibility, morally and ethically, this must be said, and it must be said that people know that we're serious about education. You know, our SOL rates are declining. Now, you see that around the state, but for us, we know some of the reasons why, and it's resources. That some of the reporting groups are lagging behind, that we know that the multiple schools could be in risk of losing full accreditation. And as I tell the principals, I'm not here to blame the principals or the teachers. I'm here to blame me, because my responsibility is to go ask for the budget that you need. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm asking for the budget that they need because they know their buildings, they know how to operate their buildings, they know their staff, they know the staff needs, and they know their children. And if you've been in our schools, you know that our principals know their children, and they know the needs that they have and the things that they have to have. A strong educational system is an asset to the overall health of a vibrant community. That is the key. And where there are poor school systems, you do not see growth. You see decline in people moving. And you don't see businesses coming in to the areas because they know they're not going to educate people to get a quality workforce. So just some information about reading. So as you notice, not only with Chesterfield, but also through the state, things are declining throughout. And there's issues there that we have to address. And that's a state issue because not only the county, but the state has adequately funded education. And you can look at the writing scores as well. History scores. And we look at third grade reading rates. It was great to have the literacy conference here with over 540 people here on Saturday and hearing the same message on how important reading is, but also knowing that our district itself, the division, for the next 4 years, all in on K-12, pre-K to 12 reading and improving it, and how do we do that? And we had some phenomenal people here for great workshops, and everybody realizing society, again, our kids are coming in with less skill sets, less vocabulary as they enter us into that 4-year-old and 5-year-old time. So we know that we have more young men and women speaking other languages. Special education population continues to expand, and we have to be able to meet the needs of the student, but also meet IEP requirements. And also when you look at student health and wellness, that it becomes a little more complicated when you don't have the resources, like a nurse in every school, like more counselors, more mental health workers, that we see what the problems are in society, but not having enough resources. And if we put the money into it ahead of time, we may be able to counteract some of the things that go on in our society. Mental health concerns, that we know that our threat assessments and everything else, things are going up. And the things that not only are we working with our students, but a lot of times our schools are working with the families and helping them get through difficult situations and traumatic experiences. So one of the largest factors of student success, we know this, the people on the front lines, the most important people in our school district are our teachers. Not that everybody else isn't important, but we know every day. I still have no idea how you survive as a kindergarten teacher each day. They should get statues of them in every building. And I just think, you know, what our teachers do every day for our kids. And I've seen some unbelievable things that I've just got to step back and, you know, almost choke up about, because what they do for our kids and how they help our children. They're phenomenal people in Chesterfield. And so how do we compete? How do we make sure that the people who want to come here want to stay, and they're not being driven out because of we're not paying them enough, or we're not dealing with that. We're losing too many good people to other areas because of the salary. And how do we add additional staff and get above this point of being a minimalist of putting staff in the building and putting the staff in the buildings that we need to have to make a difference for young men and women, that every year when kids leave and go home for the summer, they say, I had a great teacher, I can't wait to come back. That is a sign of a great school system. So developing the budget. So the proposed operating budget is going to be interesting, but exciting. And, you know, we looked at our enrollment. Remember, the numbers keep changing on us. I think our numbers actually change every day. They just keep getting more and more students. But here's how we are with our projection. And we looked at the governor's budget. We're excited about it. And we really would ask the county to, that 44% funding, maintain. And we'll show you how that helps us in one sense in that area. We also look at the need of our budget to meet the state requirements and guidelines, to meet the expectations of the community for safety and quality, to provide staff levels not addressed in the past decade. And I use the term kicking the can. And it's this is not a blame game on anybody. This is to say we're addressing the needs of our district. We're telling you the needs of our district. We're asking them to be funded. What happened when the recession hit, a lot of stuff happened. It's over. We need to gather ourselves and fill the pantries back up. And we look at decompression, and I think this is a major issue for us. And I will say this now: decompression is a one-time deal. It has to occur right away. It's pulling the Band-Aid off. Nobody likes to hear that. You can't do this over time. It's right to the point. Let's get it done. And when you see the scales, let's keep our teachers who've been loyal to us. And throughout the system, this first year all the way through 30 plus, it benefits our teachers that they want to stay because they know that we've gone out of our way to make sure that they're compensated for the great work that they do. So some longstanding mandates that you know of that we required, and you'll see when we offer the budget, we have the non-discretionary funding that we have to do, and then there's some things that we want to add to make us a better school system. And you cannot remain a quality school system without appropriate funding. You can have the best people in the world. You still have to have the resources to help them out. You know, we have the quality, standards of quality for the state constitution requirements and the state board requirements to formulate SOQs, General Assembly with revised SOQs, and determine the costs and appropriate costs for state and localities, standards of accreditation, standards of learning, 65% rule for instructional spending, and maintenance of effort. So when you see our budget being presented, there are so many, we have these guidelines that we must deal with first before we look at things outside of the norm. You know, the community expects us to transport their children to and from school. I did not know this till about my second month here. There's not a state law or guideline saying you have to transport students. It says students with a disability. But actually, there's not a state law that says we have to transport students to school. Now, we do, and we're getting better, and we're hiring more drivers. We know, we wouldn't say we'd never do that. I'm saying, I just thought it was kind of an interesting point. It's like, there's not a requirement to have a nurse in every school. I was sort of shocked. And they expect us to have a safe and supportive and nurturing learning environments. That parents want the services based on their child's needs. If each of you send us a child and they each have a different need, you don't want us to teach them the same way or put them in the same type of class, or they may need a pull-out, they may need additional staff, they may need additional help during the day. And our parents expect that, which they should. You know, parents expect qualified and outstanding educators. And you get that by making sure the salary scale is where it needs to be. And they expect us to maintain the buildings to be better maintained. So you see the funding of the student growth correctly. And in the budget in the past, the enrollment increases. We looked at only the budget size of new teachers. We didn't look at the overall point, and Thomas will talk about this a little more, about the needs of those students because the funding was not available. And so we're addressing that today. And not only the other positions that we need, but the resources students need. Looking at the bus drivers issues, looking at administrators, looking at the educational services, the support people that we add to that. And how do we make sure that our schools aren't stretched too thin? That causes a lot of stress. When I don't have the resources to help, it causes more stress, and our teachers don't need that. So when you think about our per pupil allocation for our school funding, this was a right sizing of our school allocation. This was we went back 20 years. It goes back further that this $52 per student was the allocation that they were getting. So I think things have changed since 1999, 2000, and the expenses of adjusting that, and which causes a lot more stress on the schools, on our teachers buying supplies, or our parents buying supplies, where we should be having those allocations in the schools and helping it. And so we do believe we have a really good plan on helping and putting equity in the buildings and looking at the needs of the students as well. So the variables. We are a large business entity, and there's Jamie Vollmer has a book, and the story, the schools cannot do it alone. And so he was given a speech, and they were talking about things that they make. And there was a teacher in the front row in the book, and she was actually a teacher who'd been a mature teacher, been around a while. And she was sitting there, and she's actually crocheting, the book tells us. And she was listening. And he talks about how industry works, and you can do it in the schools. It said, so when you make I think it was a pie, and you're making blueberries, and you are famous for blueberries. And they said, yes. So if you get a blueberry that's bruised or not in the condition that you think, what do you do with it? And he said, we throw it out. And she goes, exactly. Because we don't throw people out. Well, that's why we're not like business. All children walk in deserve a great education. And it sort of struck a nerve that I think our community needs to hear. All means all. And when you live in Chesterfield County, we are going to teach your child to the best of our ability with the resources that we need. And so when we see that we want to differentiate, and that's a good thing, that means we're not using a cookie cutter for our children. So when you look at the reality and everything that goes on here, we know there's only so much money. We know that. And I will say that costs and expenses have changed somewhat in 10 to 20 years. That there can be a difficult balance between addressing the growth and ideas, things new, and maintaining the outdated items, the old stuff, when developing a budget. We need to be in a competitive market for all of our employees, or they move. They may love it here, but they must support their families. You know, the requirements that we have by the federal and state laws deal with the full funding of what we do. Some of the requirements don't match expectations, like staffing levels at schools. We don't want to be minimalist here. We want to make sure we are staffed appropriately. And when you look at the funding for allocation of schools and federals for the local match requirements, we're looking at teacher salaries. We also talk about the aging of facilities and the infrastructure of what goes on here. And we know that we still have that issue. That's not part of this budget, but it is a big piece that we'll be talking about in the future, about we have schools that need help. And we have to also add new schools as well with the growth that's occurring. Items we must be replaced. We're looking at replacement cycles. You know, when you look at buildings and furnishings, instructional materials, computers, books, playgrounds. I was shocked that we did not have a playground budget to help. Equipment, uniforms, etc. When you look at the things that are aging on us and looking at what we're trying to do, maps. And you see maps that are old. Now that we have our laptops and we can go online sites to look at things. Just things that are aging that we need to replace, that have to happen. So according to the Virginia Education Association, and this is always disputed, what the salary really is, but heard a great speaker last week and they were talking about the salaries. And said, if you take away Northern Virginia, the rest of Virginia would rank either 46th or 47th, I think. It's in that area, the bottom 5 in the nation among states in salaries of teachers. That had more of an impact for me than this, that statement that they made. And so pay for other professionals are typically trails behind the national averages, as well as private industry. So these are my last 2 slides, and I thought they were interesting. I give credit to Tim Bullis on this. He loves these 2 slides. But that's our average teacher. So as you notice, it's a blow, a family of 4 for free reduced lunch. And then that's what LeBron James makes, every basket he makes. And that speaks to societal view of what's important. If we allow education not to be the most important thing in our society, we fail. And we fail our kids, and we fail the professionals. It must continue to be the most important. It's an economic driver. It's a community driver. It's a feel-good driver, that people move here. People are not moving here for the sunny and warm weather, not today especially, right? They're moving here because they know that we have an outstanding educational system. And I believe that improves property value. It improves business input coming in. It has so many positive points for us to move forward. And that's why this budget you're going to see directly impacts every child in our school system. I'm going to turn it over to Thomas now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Daugherty. It's appropriate that his last slide was LeBron James because we have a number of LeBron Jameses on our team, and at this time I'd like to recognize our LeBron-filled budget team. In the back row, in the center section over here, are a number of our budget analysts, and in the front up here is our Director of Budget Management, Denise Sandlin, and her Assistant Director, Kathy Sobczak. So if you all would please stand to be recognized at this time. Thank you for your hard work on this budget. You may notice that only 7 people stood, and that is the sum total of our entire budget office for $750,000 operating, not to mention capital. Folks, it is pretty thin, not just in schools, but in all facets of our school division operations. It's my pleasure to walk you through some of the state regulations that we're required to talk about every time we talk about budgets, and promise that we'll spare this for you next year. But in general, what the superintendent is presenting to you is what he's legally required to present to you, and that is a needs-based budget. It is for you to discern what that looks like moving forward, and it is for our appropriating body to confer a final product. But here's where we are. So with that, the governor's proposed budget has an increase of $30 million. Much of this proposed state funding is due to rebenchmarking. And basically what that means is that based on property values and taxes within the county, as well as population, which are the key drivers to the local composite index, Chesterfield has gotten wealthier. And as a result of getting wealthier, state aid has depreciated down, but what the state has also discovered simultaneously is that over the past 2 years and the 4 years before it, the cost of education has also gone up, and they have re-benchmarked that. The difficulty for us is that if our local composite index had stayed the same as it did in the last biennial budget, we would be looking at a $34 million increase, not a $30 million increase. So a big difference, a difference of more than 10% in terms of increase. The governor's proposed budget does provide additional funds for at-risk students, additional per pupil allocation. It does address school counselors, which is a dramatic need in our community, as well as serving the needs of English language learners. It does have a few other components, and we've incorporated that in this funding proposal that the superintendent is presenting to you tonight. As I mentioned before, the local composite index has shifted, reflecting that the property wealth of Chesterfield County has increased relative to the rest of the state. And it's that relative increase that's important. It's not that it's just increased, it's increased relative to other communities in the Commonwealth. And this, of course, has made a significant impact on our bottom line. The superintendent's proposed budget also includes $24 million in local transfer from the county government. This is what we are recommending to stay at a 44% of revenue, which is what was in the previous year's budget, and what we are recommending is that we stay with that same level of revenue in terms of percentage. The state says that we should be funded at X, and therefore, proportionally, we are recommending that the county be funded at Y, just like it was last year, without change. The trouble with this is that this still does not fully fund the proposal that we are bringing for you today, because this is, in fact, a needs-based budget. So when you look at the balance sheet that we presented for you in your online documents, you will see that there is a shortfall. It's not that we don't know how to use Excel or that we can't do math. It's that you have asked us for a needs-based budget, and the superintendent has provided that for your consideration. So with that, the county transfer over the past 5 years has been around $47 million, which has averaged out to about $9.4 million a year. The difficulty with that is that when we increase at 1,000 students a year incrementally, it costs us about $7 million in carrying costs just to meet that need for growth. So we're already starting at a place where we're unable to afford our growth as we continue to expand. The percentage of the county budget given to local schools has remained relatively constant. However, the total county revenue collected has not. As a matter of fact, it's increased, and it's increased dramatically. County residential real estate assessment value grew by $1.5 billion from fiscal 18 to 19. We know this to be true. But yet, in the approved 5-year plan, we're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of $8 million a year in planned and projected increases, even though we know that that's not going to meet our ongoing needs. So let's take a look at where we stand and our relative competitors. And so what we've done is we've broken out our per pupil cost and looked at our nearest competitors in terms of size, geographic area, and relative expense, and we've benchmarked it. And the first category that we want to look at is administration, attendance, and health. Someone might say something to you along the lines of, well, gosh, they've got so many administrative folks there at central office or in the schools. You are way over budget because you're so top-heavy. All evidence would say that we are not. Compared to our relative colleagues, the state averages around $670 per student in administrative, attendance, and health costs. This is everything from social workers, psychologists, assistant principals, and central office administrators are funded out of this. So it's no surprise that when we need extra mental health services, we land in last place. Now I'm going to throw you one last caveat here. These are the last publicly available data that are for our consumption, and you'll notice that it is tied to FY18 and the annual school report as presented per the superintendent's report on the VDOE website. Soon we will have access to the fiscal 19. Based on projections and where we've stood relatively, we have not gained anywhere. And in several cases, we've even lost ground. So we sit at dead last behind Henrico, Hanover, and notice that even Hanover, right down the road, is almost a full $100 more per student spent on operating costs for administration and support for mental health services. Henrico, $50. So it's not even close. It's not even remotely close. And the state average, several $100s above. So next would be our operations and maintenance. And I know that most of our school principals would take one look at this and say, but of course, when we struggle without a preventive maintenance plan, and without adequate staff to support our maintenance needs in the operating budget as well as major maintenance, we do fall short and we fall behind. Some of our competitors here are no stranger to us. A good competitor for us to look at in general for most things is Virginia Beach because of relative size and the number of facilities that they're managing is very similar to Chesterfield. I would say Prince William from a few years ago might have been a good competitor, but they are also growing, as well as Loudoun. And I know what most people think when they see Northern Virginia school systems up there, and they take a look at the cost for Northern Virginia school systems. But the challenge, of course, is that Northern Virginia school systems do have an extra cost associated with them, but they are not paying their folks double what we pay our folks, and that sometimes is the comparison cost that we look at. So looking at pupil transportation, we're not last. Sort of. The difficulty in comparing us to school divisions like Norfolk is that their routes, because of their small city footprint, are considerably less than ours. And they spend considerably less than ours benchmarked against fuel costs. So when you remove fuel costs from our budget and theirs, hate to tell you this, folks, we're last again. And when we look at instruction, this is a real point of pride for school boards of the past, boards of supervisors of the past, and for present, is that we are not last in terms of our instructional spending. We have prioritized instructional spending above everything else that we do because it's the right thing to do and because we know it will move the needle furthest and fastest when we focus on what happens in the classroom. and the vast majority of our funds per pupil get expended on what happens in the classroom. When we talk about the total regular school day expenditure and what we spend on regular education, we do, of course, in the aggregate end up last. The comparison for us in Region 1 looks very much the same. The comparison for us across the state, we are in the bottom quartile, and that's not a surprise either. Against our nearest competitors, we're not close. We're pretty far off. Just across the river, it's nearly a $500 difference per child. Multiplied over 63,000 students, that's a pretty significant difference in terms of the quality that you're able to provide both our teachers in support and our students in terms of support. So, taking a look at this very, very busy chart, this kind of lines up everything over a several-year period from fiscal 12 to fiscal 18. And what you can see from this chart, and we'll let you dissect this on your own time, is that not a whole lot has changed in terms of our relative position. We are still last. And I only say this because when our teachers are given a choice and an opportunity to go to communities where they feel supported relative to communities where they don't feel supported, this matters. And they feel it in the classroom because we cannot continue to ask them to do more with less. And so a big theme of what you've seen in the superintendent's proposed budget is that we have continued to maintain a base level of performance that we are now starting to see erode over time, and losing a point here or there on an SOL test that we don't really like being measured against, but it is the measuring stick nonetheless. You know, we don't really pay attention a point here or there, but when we start to see a trend over several years like we're seeing right now, if we don't invest our resources in the right spot, we will find ourselves looking a whole lot like our competitors and our neighbors to the north and to the east and to other school divisions in the area. And this will cease to become a first-choice community because its school system no longer carries the quality that it once did. So we're a little nervous about that. And so the school division, through the direction of our superintendent, has presented this board a needs-based budget, and I'm going to unpack some of the elements of that needs-based budget. This budget is not complex. It has very few moving parts. It addresses and meets requirements and guidelines as set forth by the federal government and the state. It also helps to meet community expectations in terms of what we are expected to provide. Dr. Daugherty mentioned that transportation for general education students is not a requirement, but it sure is a community expectation. And we intend to honor those community expectations. We will be addressing growth in a very deliberate and accurate way. And we want to serve every child that walks through the front door of our school system. We want to recruit and retain the very best on our staff and keep them coming. And of course, we want to align our schools and our needs to our resources. So in general and in the aggregate, you've got our top line, which are our transfers from the county government. And if you take out interest, prior year savings, and a projection for prior year reserves, it shakes out to be about $24.4 million. In terms of state aid, when you look at sales tax and state basic aid together, that shakes out to be about $30 million. From the federal government, this is targeted support, and if you wanted to pin something on this specifically, this is like ROTC. What is not included in this revenue projection is our federal aid in terms of title grants. So no IDEA, no Title I, no Title II, no Title III, Title IV, and so on. That's on a separate budget altogether. What we're showing you right now is just our base operating budget. As we have discussed before, the county government and the schools would like to work on the capital improvement plan as a collaborative project, and you will see no capital improvement plan recommended tonight for your consideration because it was expressed to us that it is the board's wish to work collaboratively with county government on that. And so the superintendent is proposing a revenue picture of $737.5 million, which is a difference of about $60 million from last year's revenue picture. That's just the revenue side. And as we said before, this is short of the total budget that is being proposed. So the expenditures that we're proposing for the board's consideration is in excess of this $737.5 million that you see before you tonight. So now let's talk about the expenditures. So and very briefly, we'll talk about what we have included in terms of aid. Pardon me, this is about revenue. The superintendent's proposed budget does include $24 million in additional revenue, not including our carryover funds from the previous year, which is about 44% of the revenue that is planned for next year, which would be consistent from last year to this year proportionally. So proportionally consistent revenue would involve a $24 million increase. Without the additional state and local funding, we would have to make significant cuts, and we would not meet state or federal requirements in a number of categories. So with that, we've dissected the expenses into 4 main categories for the board's consideration and review. The first category are non-discretionary funding expectations. These are things that we're either legally or contractually required to adhere to, and you'll get a mix of both. And we'll break those out for you. It is an expectation either by the state, federal government, or by some other arrangement that we follow suit and that we do some type of expenditure in the categories that will be presented to you. The second category is the discretionary category. And these are items that are proposed directly by the superintendent. They're not legally required, but have some consequence if not funded. And definitely have a moral obligation, if not the legal obligation, to bring them forward for the board's consideration. The third category are enhancements to existing services that we're already offering. Things that we currently do but hope to improve through some type of augmentation or change to those existing services and an improvement. The last are brand new initiatives. We do have an extensive list that we put in the budget document that you see, which was a 3-year budget document that's attached to board docs that were unfunded requests. About $15 million worth of requests that never even made it into the budget because we couldn't find the right place over a 3-year period to land them. The budget document that you do have is not just a spending plan for fiscal 21, but also at the county's request, a multi-year plan to address fiscals 22 and 23 to give you some type of projection of what we will need and when. Because several of the things that were introduced in the governor's budget were at least over 2 years, and we can reasonably forecast out 2 to 3 years with some of the expenditures that we know we'll need. So with that, let's talk about the non-discretionary items that are in the superintendent's proposed budget. The first two, the General Assembly passed a 1% increase in the employer contribution of VRS. So right off the top, just with our base budget as it is right now at $677 million, you can add $3.3 million to cover the employer contribution of VRS. Additionally, we are to expect a 4.5% increase to health care for the employer responsibility for health care. So before we've done anything, before we've made a single decision of any kind with any consequence, we are already looking at $5.8 million right off the top that we know in new money will have to cover some base expenses for the staff that we presently have in place. The next is an estimate. We're still trying to get a final number on this, but this is a projection in the debt service, and I should note that this is not the total debt service that the school system pays back to the county. This is in addition to our current debt service. Currently, debt service is around 8% of your budget, which is a high carrying cost for debt service. It's a little peculiar. This is one of the few school districts that I've ever worked in where the appropriating body charges the school system its own debt service when they're the debt agency. It's a little weird. But nonetheless, it has been practice in the past for local government to charge you a debt service for debt that has been incurred on your behalf. And as a result, debt payments have gone up, and that's our estimate at this time. That might change. We do believe that our rates will increase for utilities and that we will have to adjust for our present utility costs. We've taken several measures and even put out an RFP for some behavioral energy efficiencies to support some changes in how we use energy consumption. But when your power bill is in the millions and you realize a small rate increase looks a lot like $250,000. And again, these are things in the non-discretionary category where we really don't have any control over. The next item is tied to the state's budget, and in particular, the standards of quality. The standards of quality establish minimum state standards for staffing tied to ratios. The first one is school counselors. In the governor's proposed budget, he endorses the Virginia Board of Education's change to the standards of quality, which would lower the counselor to student ratio significantly. And to be in line with that, he is trying to do this over a 2-year period to bring it down to the recommended ratio of 250 to 1. Well, right now I can assure you we are nowhere near 250 to 1 in terms of our counselor-student ratio. At the elementary level alone, we're at 455 to 1. So this incremental step would take 22 FTEs in terms of counselors in the first year and 60 counselors in the second year to meet that state expectation. So the vast majority of these counselors would go into the elementary grades in the first year, and in the second year be more evenly spread across the elementary and secondary levels. The second category is to meet the ITRT standard of quality, which is the instructional resource component of the standards of quality, where they have an expectation that school divisions are staffed at a ratio of 1 to 1,000. Presently, we do not meet this. We are kind of cobbled together to meet this standard at this time. To close that gap would cost you 19 FTEs. The reason it's called instructional designers, that's just kind of the name we use for it in Chesterfield County. It's important to note, too, that these numbers reflect the salary and benefits, not just the base salary of the staff members that we are referencing. The next up is K-3 class size reduction. Wisely, the Commonwealth of Virginia several years ago recognized that schools with a high level of poverty need additional support in early education. So as such, the pupil-teacher ratio is on a sliding scale based on your school's level of poverty above 30% free and reduced lunch. So as a consequence of that, as our school division, and Dr. Daugherty showed you a slide how our economically disadvantaged population continues to grow every year over the past 3 years, in order to keep pace with that, we need to have other positions added in there as the ratios continue to drop because the poverty in these schools continues to go up. So why do something like this? Well, this is an incentive program too. We receive approximately $7 million in incentive funds to access this. So even though this is $1.7 million in additional expenditure, it's $1.7 million in order to receive an additional revenue of $7 million. Actually, better yet, to retain our existing revenue of $7 million. This next one is a little bit interesting because the governor proposed a significant drop in the ratio for English as a second language teachers for the student-to-teacher ratio. He proposed a drop from 1 to 58 to 1 to 50. And then the next year, it would drop even further. Well, presently, we meet that requirement, but just by a little bit. We presently staff at 1 to 46, and what we can tell you right now is that doesn't even remotely come close to meeting the needs of our English language learners, because what we know about our English language learners is that our newcomers, our level 1 English language learners and level 2 English language learners need extensively more support and need a staffing ratio that looks a little bit more like 1 to 20, versus our level 3 and level 4 ESL students, which need considerably less support and may need a ratio that looks more like 35 to 1. So with that, we know that we need to do this to maintain the current level of service that we're presently offering and then to make that service better. But we also know that in the near future, this is going to be a standard of quality and we will need to meet that. Next up is special education. We haven't quite talked about growth yet, but it's coming. And one of the things that we will know when we look at growth is that we are short in meeting guidelines for special education staffing. It's tagged with SOQs because even though special education is not part of the standards of quality, it does have a corresponding guideline. Special education is very technically a federal program covered by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. However, the state does have recommended guidelines on how you should staff special education. Presently, the staffing guidelines reflect that you should staff all level 1 special education students, and level 1 is a little bit different than ESL, so this can be a little confusing. Level 1 special education students are those that are integrated into the regular education setting and receive a nominal level of support, not a significant level of support, that they should be staffed at a ratio of 20 to 1, and that caseload should be 20 to 1. And for level 2 students, these are our students with severe disabilities, that they be staffed at a ratio of 6 to 1. Presently, we staff at a ratio of 9 to 1. Now, that doesn't seem like a very significant thing, but when you are managing the severe disabilities of 6 students or 9 students in an autism classroom, and you're the adult that's assigned to that, that becomes pretty challenging, and that ratio makes a huge difference. So to meet those guidelines, we are asking for 35 FTEs to meet that guideline. Correspondingly, below, to meet our existing needs for PTR and what we have planned for just level 1, the above number is level 2, would come at a cost of 21 FTEs. So we've got level 2, the highest need students above, and level 1, our lowest need students below. So now we're talking about growth, and this is a big number because in the past we have looked at growth very differently. In the past, when we've grown by 500 students, we've allocated 28 FTEs for every 500 students. And you know, the back of the envelope math looks really good. When you take 500 students and you divide it by 28 teachers, that's a pupil-teacher ratio of 18 to 1. That's one of the best in the area. That's phenomenal. Except that we know a couple of things. The first thing that we know is that not all of these kids show up in the same school. So when they show up in a class and they are the 105th kid in a class, you need an extra teacher. We also know that not all of the kids that walk through the front door are general education kids. We know that a large portion of our new students are English language learners. A large portion of our new students need special education support. And when you're adding 500 or more students to a school, that in and of itself is the size of a school. And you need the infrastructure to support that. And since it is a community expectation that we provide transportation even for our general ed students, we also need to plan for bus drivers. And we need to make sure that in our growth pool, we're accounting for not just general education teacher, but also counting for administrators, clerical staff, special education staff, ESL teachers, counselors. We're making sure that we're counting for everything. So in the past, and this is not a discredit to anyone who's come before because they did the best that they could with the resources that they had, instead of asking for 28 FTEs for every 500 students, the reality is that they should have been asking for 47, just to cover the basic growth needs. So when the superintendent says that we are stretched thin and that school staffing has over time gotten thinner and thinner and thinner, he's telling the truth because we haven't adequately been responsive to growth because we haven't been targeting these other categories. So in the past, when the Board of Supervisors or school board has looked at pupil-teacher ratio reduction efforts, it's kind of been all for naught to a certain degree because you haven't been keeping pace with growth on the one hand. So all of your efforts for pupil-teacher ratio reduction have been feeding in response to your growth needs, and it's created quite a challenge. So under an old methodology, we might have asked for 67 new teachers to be responsive to our 1,235 new students, but the reality is we don't need 67 new teachers for 1,200 students. We need 112 staff members, and those staff members aren't just teachers. They are staff members that are in the classroom and outside of the classroom supporting this type of growth. Dr. Daugherty mentioned in his presentation that when we are looking at our projected growth of 1,200 students, that's the size of a middle school. And that's the kind of staff that you need to bring in to support that number of students. The next one is no surprise here. Since the school division had 50,000 students, the base allocation for the number of school-based administrators has not changed. We've added a differentiated staff member here or there to support and to plug holes where we needed to, but we haven't added assistant principals or deans of students as schools have grown, and we haven't done it out of the base staffing allocation. It's always been an add-on after the fact. Adding this to the base budget would be responsible and would actually follow your staffing standards. School-based office support is kind of the same story and a pretty critical component of what we are trying to target here in meeting the basic expectations. This is no surprise as well that having a preventive maintenance plan as a central part of your budget is going to be pretty important. The question that you may have is to figure out to what extent we can plan for the future and be responsive to the challenges that we have, whether it be pay-as-you-go major maintenance or whether it be in our operating maintenance plan. And the last item for your consideration is predicated on a philosophy that every educator knows deep in their heart, which is that every school is different. The school that is right down the road that services a different community has different needs than the one that you work in. And as such, we need to be responsive to those needs, and we need to direct our resources to meet the challenges that we face on a daily basis. And so establishing, or I should say reestablishing, a differentiated staffing pool is going to be a pretty significant move for our consideration moving forward because we know that the challenges that lie ahead require us to differentiate our approach. The best part about this strategy, we know it works. Several years ago, Falling Creek Middle School and Ettrick Elementary School were denied accreditation. We did a significant infusion of differentiated staffing to meet very targeted and specific needs, and now those schools are high performing. Ettrick is a national Title I distinguished school with one of the most remarkable educational turnarounds in the history of the Commonwealth of Virginia, and it's thanks to differentiated staffing. This is how we keep Chesterfield the best school division in the Commonwealth. So we have a few more for consideration as well. As we know, one of the first things to go in budgets of the past has been replacing our bus fleet. This is not 12 buses in replacement of our entire fleet. This is 12 additional buses that were deferred in previous years. We have been planning for some time an additional 3 buses every year to add to our bus fleet replacement. But over a 20-year time period and after 300,000 miles, we know that our buses have lived their useful life and that their salvage value at that point isn't worth much at all. And so with that, we have to stop kicking the can down the road. We do need to address bus fleet replacement in a meaningful way. We do need to stretch it out over a period of time so that we're not sticking the next generation 20 years from now with a huge bill that they then have to figure out how to solve. Similarly, we continue to be focused on meeting the needs of our students with disabilities, and some of them have very unique transportation needs. For their safety, some of them require not 1 but 2 people to ride with them in a single vehicle. That is not a cheap way to do things, but it is what is required federally per their individualized education plan, and as such, we need to be responsive to that. That is a legal requirement. We need to be attuned to that. We are always looking for creative ways to solve that problem and to address their needs in a more holistic way, but the reality is some students just need specialized care, and it is our obligation to do it, and we do so gladly. The last couple that I'll bring to the board's attention in the non-discretionary category, per an agreement that we have to fully fund our SRP plan, we do rely on $500,000 in additional funding every year that we put back into that plan. Specialized education adaptive PE classes, this is a secondary program to meet the staffing ratio previously described for special education students. These are our students with severe disabilities. That's 5.5 teachers that would be spread across 24 schools. So it's not like we're dumping them all in one spot either. Dominion Youth Services provides student services for a lot of our students in crisis. An additional $300,000 is expected to add to CSA funds. We do these things gladly, and we also know that this money goes to support our children that have the highest needs. Oftentimes, our school division does apply for grants, and these grants typically enhance the instructional environment in our schools. We do need funds typically to have a local match to some of the grants that we apply for, so we do have a grant fund. Adding an additional $200,000 to that will typically multiply in terms of providing some kind of local match to a grant that we may apply for that may have a rate of return of 20 to 1. So having an account that can supply that local match is pretty critical. CTE program expansion, a lot of this is tied to the Carl D. Perkins grant, which is a federal fund that supports CTE instruction. It does have an offsetting revenue, so the net impact is actually zero. We are expecting a 1% increase in our custodial contract to the tune of $118,000. We knew that was coming. We've budgeted for it. We've planned for it. We knew that was going to happen. Annually, we do expect increases to our regional school tuition. These are our two governor schools, the Appomattox Regional Governor School in Petersburg and the Maggie Walker Governor School in Richmond. We send students to both, and we are also in the last year of funding a full class at Code RVA in Richmond as well. These are our three regional schools. Because we won't be funding additional classes beyond this year to Code RVA, this is our last year of a full 4 years full of students being sent to Code RVA. This number will drop to a small percentage each year thereafter, but it is something that we are mindful of. As the cost of doing business goes up every year, we do and are attentive to the fact that our regional schools are in no different a position than we are. They do offer pay increases to their teachers and do have additional carrying costs at their schools as well. Leave payouts is just bringing our budget up to what the actual dollar figure truly is. And at some point you may be saying, gosh, why on earth are they talking to us about $94,000 here or $75,000 here? Well, the truth is that we've skinned this budget pretty tight. Even though there are some big numbers that are tied to it, we want to bring forward to you all of the increases that we see and all of the things that are known. We continue to have in our region, not just in Chesterfield County, the need for outside legal services to support some contentious special education cases. Many of our constituents have some challenges that need to be mitigated by a third party and legally. And that does come at an expense to us. And this would be in addition to what we already spend in that category. We do require that each employee that comes to Chesterfield County go through a thorough background check, and it is an FBI background check that does have an expense. One way to curb this expense in the future is to have less churn and less turnover. What we do in terms of increased salary and benefits and better working conditions for our employees will have a translating effect on the number of background checks that we have to do. I assure you of that. Similarly, The Virginia Department of Education does have a processing fee when we do submit for licensure renewals and whatnot, and we do carry some of that expense. Again, it is not $14,000 for that expense. It is just $14,000 to right-size the budget in that line and to actually match with actual costs. One thing that everybody can celebrate and be very proud of, and a big success between county government and the schools, is the negotiated musical instrument replacement cycle. Several years ago, there was very little to no money for musical instrument replacement. So an iterative way to respond to that need is to continually add more in small amounts to a fund that can support instrument replacement. The only negative side to this is that a tuba costs $20,000. One. So it's not a whole lot of money, but honestly, this is a plan for the future. And if you can envision out 140 years, it might be up to fully funded. So radio monthly repeater fee, this is something that is required for our schools for safety. Many of our schools have dead zones on their campus in terms of where their walkie-talkies work and where the radios work for our school bus drivers. So having repeaters at strategic locations throughout our campuses means that our school administration and transportation staff can communicate for student safety. And that is it for non-discretionary items. So if you're keeping that tally in your head and you're just thinking about all the stuff that you have to spend or that you have to address, that's about $48 million in new money right off the top in non-discretionary categories. That's going to require the board's attention. Now let's talk about the discretionary items. This is the fun stuff. The very first one, teacher salary decompression and technical adjustments. When we look at our teaching staff and our support staff, a lot of their compensation was frozen in time. When you go back a decade and think about the Great Recession, and we're not alone with this, lots of other government agencies and organizations did something very similar, except that the effects continued to compound year after year. In the documents that were presented to you, we introduced a proposed teacher salary scale which would correct decompression. And essentially what this would do was reward the teachers who were loyal to us and stuck with us through the very lean years. And that is our folks that are in the middle, and that would be years 11 through 23 of service with significant right sizing of their compensation just to meet base expectations. This would be a significant competitive advantage for Chesterfield County, but as you well know, anything that you do to change compensation is discretionary. It is your choice. I know that there are many of us on staff that do not see addressing compensation as a choice. It is a moral obligation to address the fact that over time, costs do go up. Inflation is real. And so by not addressing compensation, we are in fact paying our workforce less over time. And that is one of the effects that decompression has caused, is that our folks have in fact been frozen in time in many areas. So even though this is a big number, this is also a pretty important number, because over time, if not corrected, this number will grow. Because the steps will get closer together over time, and right now our placement scale creates already a significant inequity, but that inequity will only grow over time, and the cost to repair it over time will only grow. And so the sooner that this is addressed, the better. One person asked me earlier today, is there any way that we could do this over a few years? Well, the reality is that there's a lot of budget initiatives that the board will look at, and you absolutely can address them over multiple years. There's no question about that, and the staff will definitely advise the board on many of those opportunities. However, decompression is not one of them. This is unfortunately the Band-Aid that you have to rip off. And the question is deciding when, in fact, that time is that you will rip the Band-Aid off to right-size compensation. Next up is school-based funding, and this is very important, and for bang for your buck, this is probably your highest rate of return. Speaking of things that were frozen in time, and Dr. Daugherty mentioned this earlier, the school-based allocation for principal discretionary funds, basically the money they use to run their school, was frozen at $52 per student. The funny part about this is that we can't trace the progeny of this to an actual start date. The furthest back that we could go where we could identify records was over 25 years ago. So this number has been frozen at $52 for 25 years. Just inflation alone over the past 20 years would bring this up to $89 per student. That's pretty significant. So what we are proposing for the board's consideration is that we adjust for inflation for the past 20 years, bring that number up to $89 per student. And additionally, we also provide differentiated funding to support students in risk populations. And let me show you what this looks like. So we have two exemplar elementary schools that we wanted to share with you. So the first exemplar elementary school is Bensley Elementary School. Their base allocation at $52 per student brought them up to $33,000 for last year, or this present year's allocation for discretionary fund. So the principal of Bensley Elementary School has $33,000 to run her school for the entire year. With a projected enrollment of 619 students, that base allocation would jump to $55,000. If you have been in public education long enough, you still think that that's a pretty laughable number, but it is an incremental improvement, and we're at least paying attention to this. I would imagine that the superintendent would bring a proposal to increase this annually over several years to bring this to a number that is more in line with what it really takes to pay for the expenses at a school. And what we would propose that we would do is that we would add $25 for each economically disadvantaged student, $25 for each student with disabilities, and an additional $25 for each English language learner. We would add that all up, and then their base allocation would have a weighted adjustment of $77,000, which would be a net change of $44,000 to their base allocation. That's a huge difference for this school and what they would be able to do in terms of materials and supplies. When we lean on our parents and our teachers to provide a lot of the school supplies to run a school, we're doing something wrong, folks. And we really need to address this in a meaningful way, especially in our high poverty communities. So what happens when we have a student who happens to be economically disadvantaged, an English language learner, and also a student with disabilities? We would be giving the school $75 for that student, because guess what? That's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what they need to offset the expenses for materials and supplies. Conversely, Betty Weaver Elementary School, which has a very different student population, would also receive an increase in their base allocation. But since they have fewer economically disadvantaged students, fewer students with more students with disabilities is what it looks like, and fewer English language learners, their base total would be this. So for our schools that don't have robust PTOs or PTAs to support the goings-on in school, this is a way to correct this for the board's consideration. Next up is bus driver compensation. We proposed earlier this year a significant increase in bus driver compensation this fall with fund balance. Some of that was funded. We would like to fund that some more with an additional 75 cents per hour. This is about 5.5–6% increase in bus driver compensation. We do not believe that this will be a huge boon in recruiting, although I'm sure it will help. But it will help to reward our bus drivers and retain our bus drivers who are doing a great job for us, and to communicate to them that we value them and that we are invested in them like they're invested in our school communities. For everybody else, if you're not a teacher, you're not an instructional staff member, you're not a bus driver, we propose a 2% salary increase for the rest of staff, which is a pretty flat raise for everybody else. But you know, if you're a tech person, you were kind of left out of this decompression effort or this bus driver compensation, so we wanted to recognize the staff members that were otherwise not included. The last big discretionary item that we'll bring to the board's attention is that we still don't have a nurse in every school building. We have several itinerant nurses in the school division, and a dozen nurses would help us close the gap to provide us with a nurse in every school building. We are very mindful of this. We do not necessarily, from a staff perspective, see this as a discretionary item. However, because there is limited funding that is provided at the state to have nurses in the school division and no standards of quality associated with that, we are proposing that this be a high priority for the school board's consideration because of the needs that we have and the safety needs that we have in our schools. For many of our students, their contact with their nurse is their sole health care provider. There are some in our community that say that schools should not be in the business of providing health care. The reality is that we need to meet our students' needs, their safety needs, their health needs before they can learn. A good way to think about that is think Maslow's hierarchy of needs before you think Bloom's taxonomy, and processing anything that happens in the classroom when you're sick or when you're not feeling well. It just doesn't happen, and we do need to attend to that. It is an urgent need. So with that, we come to our third category, and I'll very quickly go through enhancements to our existing services, as the board can digest a lot of this on your own. These are services that we currently already provide, but that we would be adding to over time. The first is transportation overtime. If we do not find a way to close the gap in the number of bus driver vacancies, transportation overtime will continue to be a major issue for us to consider in our buses. Vehicle operations, fuel, maintenance, we do have projected increases in those categories. A lot of that is outside of our control, as we do not control our bus maintenance. That is a service provided by county government. Coordinators for special education. We definitely are concerned with the first day of school and providing transportation to students with disabilities on the first day of school, because that is a requirement for us to provide a free and appropriate public education all days of school, not just on some. And transportation is one of those requirements for special education students. Having our coordinators of special education to quarterback IEP team meetings over the summer and to make sure that our kids have the right transportation on day one is really important to us, except that it comes at a big expense. Having a digital curriculum for our digital platform. Several years ago, we had made the move away from print textbooks, and that's definitely a topic that this board, I'm sure, will want to discuss at length, but it doesn't change the fact that we have the resources that we have today, and we need to support them. Replacement projectors for some of our high school projectors. This is going to be an ongoing issue as we start mapping out our assets and the needs to replace those assets when they've lived their useful life. You know, we already know that the useful life of a school bus is 20 years or 300,000 miles. What's the useful life of a projector? Well, we're starting to find out. That's not a good thing. Middle school and elementary school deans serve a critical function on school improvement teams, but right now they're on a teacher contract. Extending them by 10 days to match their high school counterparts would be a huge boon for schools in terms of their ability to plan throughout the summer. One of, I would say, my least favorite parts about being in public education is when people constantly say, "So, are you working this summer?" When the reality is that is the busiest time for school administration as we prepare for our students in advance of a school year. And to honor the work that our principals and assistant principals and deans of students do, keeping their teams intact when we know they're working anyway, and actually compensating them for the work that they do is a critical piece of the puzzle. We do quite a bit of analytics with our neighbors in terms of teacher salary scales throughout the state, budgets throughout the state, and we use a forecasting software called Forecast 5. It does have an annual renewal fee. We kind of got it gratis this year It was a good tool for us. We'd like to use it again next year. We would also like to utilize some highly secured radios for our security manager and his team. When we do have incidents, we do need to have a secure line and one that is kind of the equivalent of a modern-day portable bat phone. That does have a cost, and you may say, gosh, it's only $20,000. Can't you just make that happen? Well, the reality is we're bringing everything to you. We're showing you the things that we know are important, no matter how much they cost and no matter how significant they may be or insignificant. Same with regrading our security staff at our secondary schools. These are folks that work very hard, but it is hard to attract people at the salary that we offer. So that brings us to initiatives. This is all the new stuff, and this is where we're going to wrap up for the evening. Growing our facilities management team. We have a target of one facilities staff member or maintenance staff member for every 50,000 square feet in the school division. If you're looking for a metric, that is the industry norm for facilities maintenance. We are nowhere near that. In the nearly 10 million square feet that we have in the school division, you can do the math. We're not remotely close to that. We should staff custodians at somewhere in the neighborhood of 28,000, or one custodian for every 28,000 per shift. Presently, we only have 2 shifts. Most custodial outfits have somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 shifts. So we are significantly below that threshold in terms of both our contracted services as well as our in-house services. As we had mentioned, to provide special education transportation at the base level was that $800,000 figure you saw a few slides ago. That's just to meet legal expectations. But to provide the level of service that we know we need to provide for our kids, which would be possibly a companion person to ride with some of our students with severe disabilities, that has a significant cost. Some of the expectations have changed in the school board's meeting room in terms of some of the engineering that's required for you to broadcast your meetings. As painful as it sounds, it is actually an initiative because it would be something new for us, but for $13,000, we do have the expectation to broadcast your meetings to adhere to some type of sunshine in response to your constituents. So with that, what it all boils down to is that even though we have projected revenue, and it is projected revenue, at $737.5 million, the total ask that we've presented to you, the superintendent's proposed budget, Dr. Daugherty is requesting $777 million, which is still at a deficit of nearly $40 million, or $3.9 million above what the projected revenue is. So when we take a look at things proportionally, you'll see that for the most part, we're definitely doing what we're supposed to be doing. 71% of our budget is focused on the thing that matters most, which is instruction. And that is almost all people. That's teachers in the classroom. Some things that are a little wonky, debt service at 8% of your budget, which is more than twice what we spend on administration, attendance, and health. That's a little concerning. Pupil transportation's about where the norm is. Statewide, technology, operations, maintenance, all about where the norms are statewide. Nothing is out of place there. So when we look even a little bit closer in terms of specific funds that we have, our operating expenses versus salary and benefits, transfers between county and the schools, our debt, and then our capital that is PAYGO capital, that's all mapped out here for you as well. We are 78% salaries and benefits. We are a people organization. Making a cut to our budget is making a cut to a job and somebody who is serving kids. So with that, what do we do next? As you know, we have several board work sessions that have been mapped out for the board's consideration and for the board to hear some reports. After some robust conversation tonight, we may hear some direction on some of the presentations. Staff is prepared already at your next board session to present on staffing and school-based allocations. We expect that you'll probably want to hear more about those as well, because those are two of the bigger items in the discretionary column. We also are seeking community input. We have a public hearing scheduled for February 11th at the board's pleasure in the public meeting room. There's also the opportunity for constituents of yours to communicate with the entire school board through the school board's email account and with the superintendent directly. So we are looking forward to hearing from our constituents in support of the superintendent's proposed budget. We also have community district meetings scheduled at your pleasure, beginning with the Dale District meeting next week on the 27th at Byrd High School, the Clover Hill District meeting at Clover Hill High School on the 29th, the Bermuda District meeting at Thomas Dale High School on the 30th, the first of two Matoaca District meetings on February 3rd at Cosby High School, and then following again at Matoaca High School on the 5th, and the first of two Midlothian District meetings at Davis Elementary School on the 6th and at Midlothian Middle School on the 10th. And so we look forward to seeing our community out at these events to ask questions and to seek input and offer support. So with that, we do encourage folks to thank their legislators for their historic investment in public education and their support of the governor's proposed budget. The governor proposed a $1.2 billion increase to direct aid, which has definitely worked its way into the Chesterfield budget to the tune of $27 million in direct aid and an additional $3 million in potential sales tax revenue. So we are expecting quite a bit, and thank our legislators for that. But we are also asking for our constituency to advocate on behalf of greater flexibility and how we spend those dollars so that we can put them to the areas of best need. And of course, we want continued advocacy for increased local funding. Our county transfer over the last 5 years has been significant, and we are grateful for every dollar that our county government has provided for us. But truth be told, it is not what is needed to meet the needs moving forward. Our county has the capacity to meet our needs in the school system. The state has recognized that through its local composite index and adjusted accordingly. So it is incumbent on us to advocate for what the schools need, and just that the superintendent proposes his needs-based budget for the board's consideration. So with that, the superintendent and I and staff will entertain any questions that the board may have at this time. And we defer to you, Madam Chair, for leading this evening's board discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Daugherty. Is there any discussion regarding the presentation from anyone on the board? Do y'all have any questions, comments? It's a lot to digest. Give him a second. I'm sure Catherine has one.
Madam Chair, that's why we thought, we think today was important for you to receive the information.
Yes.
And that's why we have several meetings and opportunities for you to digest this and then come back to us in the public forum and say, okay, let's talk about the following. We think that's a really good format. I mean, we'll take any question you have here, but this really was, we knew there was a lot of information. We started this in October, so, putting this together.
Yeah.
And, it's, you're long tenuous board members,
Oh, yeah.
3 months, 3 weeks. But our goal was to make sure that you had, weeks, to get some questions. Maybe your constituents who have questions, I'm sure they will, but also us to be out in public for us to present somewhat similar presentation that we can answer questions for you out in public as well.
Yes. Is there any discussion? Okay.
Oh, wait, it works. Okay. My understanding is this is also the time where we can ask for presentations for future meetings. So I noticed the slide on increasing staffing and talking about a change in SOQs for our English language learners. I'm also familiar with some of the advocacy work that I have done in the past, that our school system was in the process of rolling out the provision of English language services in home schools, so that our English language learners can go to their home schools instead of being bused to a hub. So I'd like to see where we are in this rollout. My understanding is it was occurring over a couple of years, and I would just like to see where we are in the process of returning all of our ELLs to their home schools. And then the second one would be, and I think that this is a vote, that I would like to see the School Health Advisory Board present their recommended budget allocations for this coming year's budget at a future work session. So I'll start with those. I have others, but maybe other people. So do we need to take a vote?
Basic. So under protocol, you just have to agree that those two things are okay, and let us know the issue of ESL students being in their home schools, and then the issue of SHAB presenting at the next board meeting.
So, does anyone have a comment on either one of those presentations being at the next board meeting? Next budget meeting, I suppose? Yes?
Yeah, you can just agree on it.
Just, right. Do we agree? Yeah. Everybody agree? Aye, aye. Yes, we agree. Do what Catherine wants.
If you do this as easy with the budget, we're good to go here.
Gotcha.
Just agree on the budget. We're good.
Okay. Ann?
Madam Chairman, I have a question regarding the initiatives and enhancements. Do you have any prioritization? Have you vetted those to figure out, like, kind of what's a high priority for those? For us that are new, that would be good to kind of know what your thoughts are.
As a matter of fact, we have. It is our plan to recommend to the board for consideration not just the fiscal 21 spend plan, but also a vision as to what you could expect for future expenditures in fiscals 22 and 23. So the superintendent proposes for the board's consideration actually a whole host of initiatives and enhancements over a 3-year time period. The ones that have been prioritized for fiscal 21 we see as urgent. And as a matter of fact, they all have some urgency and some timeline to them. But since this is a needs-based budget and not a wants-based budget, we did map those out iteratively because we know that we can't have everything all at one time. We did want to showcase for the board some fiscal restraint in terms of what we believed in assessment at the cabinet level with the superintendent's endorsement is the things that were high priority by placing them closer to fiscal 21.
Anyone up? You have any more comments? Okay. Dot.
Thank you so much for all of your work on this. It's a lot to digest, and I'm sure it was even more work. I can't even imagine the amount of work that went into this, and we appreciate it. Specifically speaking to the decompression, you mentioned that there would be an increase. Do you have any projected numbers on what the increase, what the cost over time would be for delaying that?
We anticipate that it would be in the millions, and here's why. Because each of our bands, if you took our staff and you divided them up into bands of employees in 5-year chunks, like all of our employees with 0 to 5 years, 6 to 10 years, and so forth and so on, all the way down, and just in our teacher ranks, we lose about 100 plus employees per band, and that if that trend continues over time, or let's say, for example, we reverse churn and we keep those employees longer, which would be what our target would be to focus on keeping those employees longer, what we would see is greater inequities between the later bands when you get into the 15-year plus worth of experience. It may be incumbent on us. These were calculations that we provided in-house. It may be incumbent on us to invest in a third party to do a more in-depth salary study to give you a projection of what that would look like over time. To be completely candid with you, it was a bit of a scramble for staff to pull that together. I give a lot of credit to our folks in Human Resources and Talent Management. Our new Executive Director, Dr. Kim Huff, is here. Her team, along with Compensation and Benefits and our budget team with Denise Sandlin, worked very closely to come up with a base calculation, but it is factored on presumptions for just this year. We do know that it would get worse. We do know that it would get exponentially worse. And we do know that as each year passes and that inequity continues to grow, along with projected regular increases if you didn't do this, because you're still looking at some point of doing some kind of adjustment to compensation, even if this didn't occur, you'd still need to keep pace with the marketplace. So you're still going to have some kind of expanded change over time, and it will grow. But yes, it would be incumbent on the board to look at some type of projection from a third party if they chose not to go this route.
Thank you. Ryan?
Once again, I'd just like to echo, thank you guys for all the work that you've done going into this. And also just to echo what Ms. Heffron said, I think it would probably be a good idea that we are able to present what it will look like if this is something that we ignore. Really, what could that cost be if this can gets kicked any further? So I think, I think we have some good direction on that. The other question I had was with the regional schools with Code RVA, and we said that the amount of money that we have to put in, our fair share of that, it will be reduced after this year. With that money being reduced, do we lose any of the seats?
So what would be reduced would be the amount that we would grow every year, not the actual total. So what you saw was what was the change from the base budget. So this is all in addition to what's already programmed into the base budget. So for example, with Code RVA, we won't be adding an additional 22 seats like we're doing this year. And the reason that we're adding 22 seats this year is because we've added a freshman, sophomore, and junior class already, but next year they'll go up a grade and there'll be seniors, juniors, and sophomores, and we would need a freshman class to fill in. Every subsequent year thereafter, the seats that we have allocated for the senior class will roll over and become the next freshman class. So this is what we do with our other regional programs too, and it is a little odd or a little confusing because Code RVA is a new school and it's in its third year of operation, its fourth year of existence. So when we are adding classes, we will cease to add classes, and it will really be at the board's discretion whether it adds or subtracts seats to any one of those schools. But we do expect them to have a small percentage increase in their tuition on an annual or semi-annual basis. It is expected, or excuse me, not semi-annual, biennial or annual basis.
Thank you very much.
Any other comments or questions? Well, I just want to say again, reiterate the tremendous lift that you've done on creating this. Very impressed with everybody and the detail that went into the budget, and my heart is really hoping that we are fully funded, especially for the decompression of the salary scale. That to me is a game changer. I've said it multiple times to anyone that'll listen, that the most pivotal part of a child's education is that teacher in the front of the room, and we need to fund that salary scale. It is a huge hunk of the budget, but it's one that I'm willing to fight very hard for, as well as the school-based funding initiative. That to me is a game changer as well, especially the differentiation of the funding with the equity piece. Teaching at a school for years where I felt there was an inequity in the amount of funds that one school receives versus another based on PTAs and PTOs and school fundraisers. To me, that is also something that we need to worked very hard to keep in this budget. Is there any other discussion, general discussion related to this year's proposed budget or process over the next several weeks, or any of the work that's in front of us? Any other discussion?
I have a question.
Okay.
So I hate asking this question because I would love to see us fully funded. If I had a magical wand and could fund the proposal today, I would do it. I'm very impressed with the proposal. When I was at the teacher rally down at the General Assembly last year, I met a lot of the teachers that left Chesterfield. I thought it was interesting. In just a couple of hours, I ran into several Chesterfield teachers that had left because of the compression. So that was not a random event. That said, let's say all 5 of us would like to fund everything presented today, but that's not possible. Could we have a list of things in the previous budget that if we come down to, let's say we need $2 million more to fully fund decompression, that $2 million has to come from somewhere. Maybe it's holding off on rolling out one-to-one Chromebook ratios or something, rather than us digging into it. I would be curious if you had any suggestions for things that we could hold off on so that we could do decompression, put a nurse in every school, things like that. So I'll just throw that out there and hoping we'll get all the money in so we don't have to go there.
I would advise you to allow the process of listening for the next several weeks. As you hear your constituents, as you hear the information, as we start to drill down, what you'll start to see is things that will surface to the top that are going to be where you want to go. There's a lot here to hold on to, especially when you think about the discretionary and non-discretionary issues. Not to push the question, but my advice would be to allow the process to move, and as we talk together and as a community, we will be able to see what we can afford and what we can't. And once this is out now, so there'll be actually additional conversations as we work with the county as well. And I think those things, we could say we'd like to have A, B, C, and D, and where can we move money and what can we do? These guys do a great job with that and try to what's the best. But among yourselves, you really need to hear what's occurring in these meetings, and they're great meetings to have in the community. They're great meetings that we have the next couple of weeks together. And I think the next couple of weeks you'll see that start to fold where you want to be. Okay?
Thank you. Okay, school board members, are there any other announcements or comments? Okay, the next school board meeting will be a budget work session on January 28th at 3:30 in the central office boardroom. The public agenda will commence at 4 p.m. If there is no further business, we need a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. The January 21st, 2020 school board budget work session is adjourned.